The Commanders looked sloppy in their first preseason game, and on Monday night, we're going to find out if that was the exception or if that's the new rule under head coach Dan Quinn. That and more right now on Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Commanders. I'm David Harrison, your guy on the ground covering the Washington Commanders for WUSA9.com and right here with you 5 days a week. You can also find me writing about the Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com. You can follow me on X at DHarrison82. I want to thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or your first view. And a special thank you goes out to all of the everydayers who come through for every single episode. Of course, I greatly appreciate you. Greatly appreciate everybody coming through. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to today's episode. If it's your first time coming through, thanks for finding the show. Hopefully you like what you hear and you come back again very soon. Coming up on today's episode, we're going to discuss 5 players that I'm watching Monday night against the Cincinnati Bengals. We're going to talk about whether or not trades involving Trey Hendrickson or Brian Robinson Jr. make sense. And we're going to kick it off by looking at the biggest thing we need to see Washington clean up in preseason game number 2. All of that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Commanders looked sloppy. They looked a little bit undisciplined in their first preseason game. But honestly, it's been something that's kind of been persistent through the training camp. We've seen several practices where there were multiple penalties, false starts, things like that. We even saw too many men on the field during the burgundy and gold scrimmage. Now, that's the only time I remember seeing that penalty specifically. So it's kind of a one-off. But when you look at all of the one-offs, and you look at all of the individual penalties, especially how many of them are pre-snap and just kind of mental errors and functional errors and all those things, you definitely want to get those cleaned up. So heading into Monday night, that is probably one of the biggest things that we need to look for when it comes to watching this preseason game with head coach Dan Quinn, because we know that's not acceptable. That's not the standard that Dan Quinn has set, that his coaching staff, Joe Witt Jr., Cliff Kingsbury, Larry Izzo, it's not the standard that the players have set, is to be sloppy, undisciplined, and all those things. So we know that's not what they expect of themselves. The question now is, are we going to see it for a second week in a row, or are we going to see it get much better with the first teams out there, at least a little bit, and at least most of the first team players, I should say. Not all of the first team players will be playing in this game. Of course, there will be a few players who are not playing specifically mentioned. We rattled off a list of those players in yesterday's episode. So if you missed that, by all means, after this one, but go back and listen to that bonus episode. Good news about bonus episodes, if you're short on time, is they're a little bit shorter than these full episodes are. But we listed all the players that DQ shared with us on Saturday who will not be playing Monday night. So Dan Quinn, like I said, confirmed that some of the starters are not going to play, but he also confirmed that some of the starters will get snaps, and then that plan will basically be customized for each player. It doesn't necessarily going to look like a first unit is in and then first unit is out like it kind of does for some other teams. You could see a little bit of what we see in practice sometimes. A lot of times in practice, you see that first unit go out there pretty much intact for the first set, and then after that, you get a little bit of sprinkling here and there. That's usually where we see Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt get first team reps, but you might see some other guys like Ja'Cory Brooks, the undrafted free agent wide receiver, getting reps with Jayden Daniels and the quote-unquote first team offense as well. So that's kind of what I expect to see going into Monday night. Specifically about Jayden Daniels, Dan Quinn said he could be in there for quote-unquote a few series. Of course, a few typically means 3. But, I think it was basically meant as a general term, not a specific term, to be general on purpose. And, probably see him in there for 2 to 3 series at the most. I would be honestly a little bit surprised if you see him in there for 3. I'm kind of expecting 2. But if you get him for 3, great. We'll see what happens. Dan Quinn also did say, quote, it's not going to be super long, so I wouldn't do an extended popcorn break or something, end quote. So that's kind of your cue to definitely want to be prepared to be seated, whether you're in the stadium or you're at home or you're in your favorite place to go to watch sports. You definitely want to plan to be seated by the time kickoff happens and probably try not to get up until at least the first 2 or 3 series for the Commanders has come and gone. And again, sloppy first preseason game with the Washington Commanders, 15 penalties in total. Dan Quinn talked about it, was very irritated by it, was very frustrated about it, called it a quote-unquote lack of focus, and said that quote-unquote drives me up a wall. So we know that he's going to want to see that get a lot better, looking for much cleaner performance. Dan Quinn did say, quote, I expect some of that sloppiness to keep going, end quote, as in get going out of the game plan, right? Ongoing position battles that we're going to watch. We're going to talk about some players specifically here at the end of the episode, but just talking about position battles in general. This first position battle isn't so much a battle of who's going to be where, because like I said, and I've been saying this since really early in training camp. Honestly, I think it started saying before training camp, your starting offensive line pretty much is what I think it's going to be. Left tackle, Laramie Tunsil, left guard, Brandon Coleman, center, Tyler Biadasz, right guard, Nick Allegretti, until Sam Cosmi is ready to return, and then right tackle, Andrew Wiley, until Josh Connerly Jr. is ready to step up. And certainly Josh Connerly Jr. will get some first-team reps here and there, has gotten some first-team reps here and there as well. And look, I think on Monday nights, I think the offensive line you're going to see is most likely Andrew Wiley at left tackle. Laramie Tunsil is one of those players who's not playing. Looks like Chris Paul maybe is going to get the starting left guard snaps. Tyler Biadasz will be your center. Right guard will be Nick Allegretti. And I think your right tackle will be Josh Connerly Jr., giving the opportunity for him to get some reps out there with Jayden Daniels in the offense. Probably a very conservative approach. Wouldn't be surprised if it's a lot of run, a lot of handoffs, which would be runs, right? A lot of screens, quick hitters, things like that. You're not going to want Jayden Daniels sitting back there behind what, for lack of a better term, we'll call kind of a makeshift starting offensive line for this game. So that's kind of what I expect. Offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury noted that Julian Good-Jones and Chris Paul have been doing a nice job stepping up. So I think Julian Good-Jones probably will get some second-team reps. Trent Scott will get some second-team reps, things like that. So we'll kind of see. Before the game, I'll be looking at their warm-ups, their walkthroughs that they do before every game to kind of look at those offensive line formations. So insiders, you'll get a little bit of an early preview, I guess, sneak peek of what that starting O-line is probably going to look like. Wide receivers. I think we've all kind of been, again, assertive that, the starting, like the top 5 wide receivers on this team are pretty much locked in, right? Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel. Obviously, Jalen Lane isn't going anywhere to draft pick. Noah Brown is a guy they love. Luke McCaffrey. That's 5 right there. So really you're playing for one active roster spot. If you're Michael Gallup, Chris Moore, Ja'Cory Brooks, right? All these guys. Michael Strawn was in that mix until he wasn't. Things like that. Cliff Kingsbury said, quote, some guys are taking advantage of the opportunities and some have not, end quote. I think Michael Strawn, obviously, is a guy who has not. Chris Moore, honestly, has not taken advantage of the opportunities. I think that's why we've seen less of him lately and more of guys like Ja'Cory Brooks, who I think has been taking advantage. He's had some drops as well. That was an issue of his in college. But, for an undrafted free agent rookie, certainly is overperforming what the expectations were of him coming into this. So I don't know how many roster spots are really up for grabs. Again, Terry McLaurin's requested the trade. Nobody really believes the Commanders will trade him. But, if they ever did and didn't get a receiver in turn for him, then potentially these guys could be playing for 1 or 2 active roster spots, though I think it's pretty much 1. And for my money, honestly, right now, I give the edge to Michael Gallup, but we'll see what happens in the game. And then we've got another preseason game as well before these decisions have to be made. Running back room. Dan Quinn has called it a quote-unquote deep group in a position of strength. Cliff Kingsbury has said that room had 6 or 7 dudes that could be playing in the NFL this season. Michael Wiley was released, an early release from that group, and he has since been picked up. I can't remember honestly where he went to, but he is on an NFL roster this training camp and right now currently. So obviously the other NFL teams agreed with Cliff Kingsbury's assessment that some really good running backs in the room, and they're all going to get their opportunity to showcase their talent. Some of these guys we know a little bit better than others. Some of these guys we don't know as much. One of them could be on the move. Is a trade, including Brian Robinson Jr., a smart move for the Washington Commanders? Right now, I'm going to tell you why it is. I'm going to tell you why it's not. All coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. These days, feels like there's advice for everything. After a sloppy performance like the Commanders had in preseason game number 1, everyone has an opinion on what they need to fix. In your own lives, it can be the same. It can be overwhelming to figure out exactly what is going to help you handle the pressure. That's where talking to a licensed therapist through BetterHelp can make all the difference. You get real, personalized guidance instead of just guessing based on something you saw on social media. For me, therapy has been crucial for building positive coping skills and learning how to set boundaries, skills that are just as important off the field as they are on it. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, serving more than 5 million people. It's easy to fit into your schedule, just a click to connect. So talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners, get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. forget the preseason for right now. The biggest moves of the Commanders' future could be happening behind closed doors. We're talking about trades for a star pass rusher or shipping out the team's starting running back, Brian Robinson Jr. We're going to get to Brian Robinson Jr. here in just a minute, but we're going to start off with Trey Hendrickson. So Cincinnati Bengals star edge rusher, leading sack player, led the league in sacks in 2024, 17 and a half sacks in each of his last 2 seasons. Trey Hendrickson, the contract disputes, the trade requests, all that stuff, it's been very public. We've talked about it several times here on the program. And honestly, I'd gotten to a point at one point during the offseason where I said, look, until something really changes, we're just not going to talk about it anymore. It's been talked about. We're not going to talk about it anymore. Well, on Sunday, those things changed. According to Ian Rappaport of NFL.com, and I believe Tom Pelissero as well, in a jointly filed report, the Cincinnati Bengals are now open to receiving communication about trading Trey Hendrickson, which basically signals that they have gotten to the end of their rope with Trey, and they basically have offered him what they're going to offer him. They're not budging any more than they already have, whatever that is. And Trey is either going to take it or he is going to go try to find it somewhere else. Obviously, if you're a team that's going to trade for him, you're going to do so understanding what it is he's looking for. And my assumption is that you're going to give it to him. I can't believe you would trade for him and then try to hardball him and lowball him and say, look, like you're not going to get your money. So that's pretty much what we've come down to. Now, the entire time, right, the Washington Commanders have been a team that people talked about potentially trading for Trey Hendrickson, why it makes all the sense in the world. They didn't go get a pass rusher in the NFL draft. They didn't sign one for free agency, all these things. Since then, they have brought in Von Miller. We've seen this unit in joint practice. We've seen this unit in a preseason game. Granted, it wasn't the starting unit. It was more the depth. We've seen them in a handful of practices or more. And pass rush doesn't look bad. It doesn't look terrible. It looks pretty stinking good, to be quite honest with you. So I think that, along with understanding just the cost, right? And then I think that having Terry McLaurin going through what he's going through with this team right now also kind of sheds a little bit of light on it, because the rumored report is also that Cincinnati Bengals want a young player or more young players, 1 or 2 young players, and draft capital to trade for Trey Hendrickson. And then you're talking about paying him, at least $30 million a year on annual average value on a new contract, if not more. That's like the floor is 30 million, if not more, for Trey Hendrickson. Now, he is the reigning sack leader, again, 2 years straight, 17 and a half sacks each season. So is there value there? Absolutely, there's value there. What might it cost for the Washington Commanders? I kind of did up a little bit of a projected trade, and I think it would probably cost them Johnny Newton, second-year defensive tackle, who many people had a first-round draft pick on coming out of Illinois last year. I imagine the Bengals are probably one of those teams that had a first-round grade on him, but he was a second-round pick because of the foot injury he had been dealing with. You're probably looking at having to send Johnny Newton to the Bengals, a 2026 third-round pick. The Commanders do not have a second-round pick next year, as of now, and a 2027 second-round pick. And then you got to give the massive contract extension. Again, at least $30 million per year, if not more, after the market has been set and reset a couple times for edge rushers this offseason. That would obviously complicate extending Terry McLaurin from many angles. You trading for a guy that hasn't been on this team and hasn't done anything for this team yet, agreeing to pay him what he's asking for, which is eerily similar to what Terry McLaurin is asked for, granted a different position. So they're weighted a little bit differently, would certainly ruffle feathers, right? And then the draft capital you're giving up, and then the player you're giving up. Like, again, to me, is it intriguing? Of course. Should Adam Peters pick up the phone and at least say, hey, like, what is it you're wanting? Yeah, of course he should. Does it happen? To me, it doesn't make a lot of sense at this stage to commit that much to one guy. Even someone as talented as Trey Hendrickson. I've been a big Trey Hendrickson fan for a while. I love his game since he left New Orleans. But I don't see it happening. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen. No, I've been wrong before and certainly could be wrong again. Where I could be wrong again is Brian Robinson Jr. So that's another story that, look, I know it was out on another B Reporters podcast recently that, they said they wouldn't be surprised if B-Rob wasn't on the roster in week 1, whether that was, source information or what, you'd have to ask him. But then Jordan Schultz came out on Sunday afternoon and sent out a tweet and said that he has a source who has told him, doesn't say if it's a team source, agent, whatever, but he's out of source. Usually guys like that, it's typically the agent that says that the Washington Commanders have been shopping Brian Robinson Jr. Brian Robinson Jr. is in a contract year, final year of his rookie deal this season. So he's a pending free agent next year. So is Austin Eckler. And he's the guy that we all talked about all during the draft lead up, free agency, all that stuff on whether or not the Washington Commanders were going to go out there and trade him, or at least, find a replacement for him. They didn't go high in the draft. They didn't go aggressive in free agency to bring in a replacement. So we entered the offseason program training camp as RB1. And truthfully, that hasn't changed on the field. It hasn't changed in usage, and it hasn't changed in performance. Now, Ja'Cory Crosskey-Merritt, 7th round pick out of Arizona, certainly is very exciting. Certainly the upside on him is incredibly high. I think at least one of the first ones, if not the first one, on the Ja'Cory Crosskey-Merritt hype train when he was drafted. But I will tell you, right now, it is still all potential. It is not proven. We went to the New England Patriots joint practice, and Ja'Cory Crosskey-Merritt certainly got some work. Certainly had some good runs in the practice, had some good runs in the game. Certainly looked really good. But Brian Robinson Jr., not in the game because he didn't play, but in the joint practice, the offense was most consistent when Brian Robinson Jr. was the running back. That's just not deniable. We'll see what happens Monday night. So far, Brian Robinson Jr. not getting any second or third team reps, only getting first team reps in practice. And again, if you are looking to trade him, demoting him to second or third team in practice isn't going to help you, right? So even if you are trying to trade him, it makes sense not to be giving him non-first team reps, right? So it kind of goes hand in hand here. But at the same time, also not getting relegated to special teams. There was one day where he was back there helping in kickoff coverage practice, and I had a conversation with an insider when this happened, because one of the insiders that's a signal to me, maybe they're not as in love with him as they might be. And I told that insider at the time, yeah, I get that, but just understand the context of that day. A lot of people were returning kickoffs that day. Basically, it was kickoff coverage practice, not kickoff return practice. And so they did a lot of kickoff covering, and they didn't want to burn out the return specialist, right? So a lot of people were returning kickoffs that day. Wouldn't have surprised me to see Jayden Daniels just fielding a kickoff and letting the coverage kind of run down on him, right? So I didn't take that with too much of a grain of salt. Now, I will tell you this. And this is where, the benefits of the insider program potentially come in. Insiders and we've been talking about this for, I want to say, about a month now. Now, not consistently, right? I first dropped about a month ago that, I had gotten some murmurs, some rumblings that potentially Brian Robinson Jr. could be traded still, even without the draft pick, even without the free agent acquisition, all of those things. It wasn't sourced effectively enough. There's ethics to this business that we're in. So it wasn't sourced enough for me to feel comfortable reporting it. Obviously, Jordan Schultz, whatever source he's talked to, he feels confident enough in that or those sources. Hopefully it's those sources. That's the biggest part of the ethics part for me, is I need multiple, and I need them to be connected at the right levels, not just one connected at the right level. One connected at the right level is still good, still solid information, and still enough for me to talk to my insiders about it. But for me to put it out there in the public space as a report, I'm going to need multiples, if not straight out of Adam Peters' mouth, which I can pretty much tell you is not going to happen. So Jordan Schultz feels comfortable enough to run with it. So we're talking about it here. Again, to me, Brian Robinson Jr. still looks like the best, most consistent running back on this team on a per snap basis. Ja'Cory Crosskey-Merritt looks like the most potential filled. He's at the highest ceiling, as we like to say. But that ceiling has not been proven. That ceiling has not been reached. And does not look to me like Ja'Cory Crosskey-Merritt is a better running back for this offense today than Brian Robinson Jr. is. For the future, certainly. Today, no. Now, that being said, we also don't get to see everything. And it's fully possible that this NFL team, that NFL teams like to hide, keep secrets from the media, has been hiding a lot of the work they've been doing with Ja'Cory, with Bill, as we like to call him. And they know a lot more than I do. I've always admitted that here on the program, that I'm never going to know every single thing there is to know. So I'm just telling you what I know based off of what I think I know. And to that end, it doesn't make a lot of sense to trade Brian Robinson Jr. I get why you would be taking the phone calls, because if you get blown away by an offer, then, look, you go out there and you take it. You got Austin Eckler, Jeremy McNichols, Ja'Cory Crosskey-Merritt, Chris Rodriguez is proven, capable when he's gotten opportunities. Demetric Felton has looked good and sometimes some spaces. So, it makes sense to be taking the phone calls. It does not make sense right now to move on from him. I don't think it makes your team better in any way, shape, or form. The only situation I will say that is intriguing to me is a potential swap of running backs with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Rachaad White. Rachaad White, potentially once out of Tampa, was the starting running back there. Bucky Brooks came in and very quickly took over the starting role in the running back room there. Rachaad White, really good friends with Jayden Daniels, things like that. They go back to their Arizona State days. So if you do a running back swap, maybe, Brian Robinson Jr. for Rachaad White and a 5th round pick, you get your 5th round pick back from the Houston Texans trade where you sent yours next year if you're Adam Peters for Laramie Tunsil. I think Rashad is a little bit more versatile. He's got a little bit more wiggle, a little bit more pass catching ability proven than Brian Robinson Jr. Not saying he's like a receiving back, but I think there's a little bit of that. Him, Eckler, McNichols, Corey Crossing-Merritt, Chris Rodriguez. Like that's a really good running back group. There are some other, issues with that still kind of get raised. But, Brian Robinson, Cliff Kingsbury recently said, quote, he had his best practice against New England and keeps getting better in our system, end quote. That was just this week. Doesn't really sound like an offensive coordinator who's planning on losing his starting running back, but we will see what happens. A lot of interesting things happening. Never a dull moment here in this business. But coming up next, we're going to get back to the game. 5 players I'm watching this Monday night when the Washington Commanders host the Cincinnati Bengals in preseason game number 2. That's next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of the year. NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football season is back in full swing. This year, me and Locked On Commanders are playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league. And if you love high-stakes competition, you have to try their new Guillotine Leagues, where the last manager standing wins. I love that prospect. I love that idea, and I've been working for the last 48 hours or so trying to work out a swap for my first round pick, trying to move out of the first round, collect a couple of other mid-round picks. And I'm dealing with some very greedy GMs out there, ladies and gentlemen. But to celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout August. To kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week. With the season right around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, you can still play head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. For a handful of Commanders, the Bengals game isn't just about team improvement. It's a personal referendum on whether or not they belong in the Washington Commanders' long-term plans. First player we're going to watch, defensive tackle Javon Kinlaw. We already know he's in the plans for this year. Could he be in the plans for the future years? You're not going to learn that on Monday, but I really, really want to see this player that Dan Quinn has been, quote-unquote, so impressed with, noting that he, quote-unquote, really stood out the most during the team scrimmage, the burgundy and gold game, and his, quote-unquote, power and strength and run effort has been really, really great. So Javon Kinlaw, a guy that, I've seen him flashing on the practice field, seen him do his thing, certainly, but I would be lying if I told you I ever had a focus on him during any specific practice, things like that. So he's going to be one of those players that I'm really looking forward to focusing on a little bit more out there on Monday night. I'm also going to be looking at the cornerback, so it's going to be a little bit of a split focus, but, we'll see what we can do. Shout out to Candy Waller, Bowie TV. She's been high on the Javon Kinlaw train for a little while now during training camp as well. So I'm sure that if you go over there, she's saying some good things about him too. Safety Jeremy Reeves is another guy I want to watch. I love watching Revo play the game. Love talking to him. Love just seeing him in the tunnel. Wherever you get to see Revo is always a good time. But Joe Witt Jr. stating this offseason that, quote, Revo has earned the right now to be a third safety type of player, end quote. And he's, quote, consistently hitting his stride at a good level, end quote. So, I mean, it's just been great to see Jeremy Reeves climb up the way that he has, earned every single rep that he's ever gotten, things like that, and certainly making plays. So I want to continue to see him not only earning those opportunities, but capitalizing on them, especially Monday night against Cincinnati Bengals, a very good offense that this defense is going to be going up against. Wide receiver Jayden Lane is another one with some injuries at the top, with some hold-ins or whatever it is for Terry McLaurin. Jayden Lane has had a lot of opportunities. They've been working him inside. They've been working him outside. They've been doing a little bit of everything. Punt return, another opportunity. So look, he had the one preseason preseason practice, joint practice. He had the one preseason game. Those are opportunities to learn and grow from experiences. Want to see how he brings that in to his second game. The young linebackers, Kane Medrano, Jordan McGee, if he can go, right? These are guys that you really, really want to be able to see. New England was the linebackers suffered, right? The linebackers just were not very good. Kane Medrano wasn't the worst, right? And wasn't the problem, certainly. But certainly that linebacker group just as a whole could not be happy with what they put on tape. So I want to see how these guys respond and how they come back. And then finally, Ja'Marr Chase. He's the fifth guy that we're watching out there on Monday night, guys. I mean, arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL, certainly one of the, if not the most electric wide receiver in the NFL. Joe Witt Jr. said he's excited to see how his corners stack up against Ja'Marr Chase and even T. Higgins, who Joe Witt called another number one receiver there in Cincinnati. And I am too. So that means I'm going to be watching Marshawn. I'm going to be watching Trey Amos. I'm going to be watching, Mikey Sanders still if he gets matched up against them. Whoever is covering Jamar Chase, the Cincinnati Bengals, is going to have my attention. So certainly want to see Javon Kinlaw on the D-line, but I also want to see how this secondary holds up because we've been praising the secondary. The coach staff has been praising the secondary. It's time to find out if we're fools or if we're seeing the truth. That's going to do it for today's episode. Next time on Locked On Commanders, we'll be coming to you from Northwest Stadium following Monday Night Football. Washington Commanders hosting the Cincinnati Bengals. In the meantime, if you've got questions or comments or you want to be part of those inside conversations we have about guys like Brian Robinson about a month before the news breaks publicly that they might be looking to trade him, you can do that by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Here on the show, you get everything that I've got sourced, that I've got confirmed, but as an insider, you're going to get a little bit of stuff that I don't necessarily have confirmed enough to put out in the public space. That's part of the fun of being an insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders again to get that inside information. NFL fantasy draft season is here. So for your second listen, check out the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast with hosts Vinny Iyer and Michelle Majuk. Listen every day to prep your fantasy draft to become the most informed manager so you can take home your league's trophy this season. Find Locked On Fantasy Football on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. To the everydayers, I see you every day. I appreciate you every day. And a special goes out to you today. Until next time, stay safe, be kind to one another. We'll talk again real soon right here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.